Xanthippus the Spartan, the Battle of Tunis, and the end of the First Punic War. As the Mediterranean winds roared and clashed with the shores of Africa, Rome and Carthage stood locked in a brutal struggle for supremacy. The Romans had triumphed at sea, their victory at the Battle of Ecnomus ringing out like the sounding of an iron bell. Now, they brought war to the very doorstep of Carthage. With the Roman consul Marcus Atilius Regulus marching inland, the Republic's legions bore down on Carthage like a storm gathering on the horizon. But in the halls of Carthage, all was not lost. A figure from the ashes of another once great power had arrived, not as a conqueror but as a bearer of wisdom forged in the fires of struggle. Xanthippus, a Spartan general, a warrior who had witnessed the fall and resurgence of his homeland, had come to answer Carthage's call. Sparta had once been brought low, not merely by external forces, but by the insidious rot of the blues, who had infested it after the fall of Leonidas and his 300. The shadowy manipulators had sought to hollow out the heart of the Spartan spirit. 4 years, they weakened Sparta from within until Alexander the Great had finally torn out the roots of corruption, setting Sparta free. Now, the old guard of Sparta, including Xanthippus, knew the truth of what had happened. With the blues driven out of his homeland, Xanthippus had turned his sights on Carthage, recognizing the familiar signs of infiltration and decay. The knowledgeable sought revenge, and Carthage, though fierce in its resistance, lacked the direction to stand firm against the disciplined might of Rome. Xanthippus knew the mark of decline all too well, but in Carthage, he saw a flicker of strength, a potential that could be kindled into a blaze. He would not let them fall as Sparta had, not while he still had the strength to fight. Standing before the Carthaginian Senate, clad in the armor of a Spartan general, Xanthippus spoke with the weight of a man who had seen too much loss. "You have the men," he told them, his voice as hard as the iron of his blade. "You have the horses, the elephants, the will. But what you lack is the strategy. The Romans fight as lions, their legions like iron walls. But iron shatters when struck from the right angle." With his authority granted, Xanthippus prepared the Carthaginian army for the inevitable showdown. The plains outside the city of Tunis would be the theater of war, a place where the strength of men would be tested against the cunning of a Spartan mind. Regulus, emboldened by his previous victories, led his legions into the open field, confident that Roman discipline and infantry prowess would once again prove their superiority. But Xanthippus, watching from his position among the Carthaginian ranks, saw the fatal flaw in the consul's arrogance. He knew that the Roman legions, as strong as they were, could be broken by chaos and disarray, forces that only nature and strategy could unleash upon them. The Carthaginian army, 12,000 strong, took its place on the plain, the thundering of their war elephants shaking the ground beneath them. These beasts of war, rarely seen on Roman soil, were Xanthippus' keystone. His plan was bold like the assaults of his ancestors at Thermopylae, and the risk was as great as the reward. But this was not a battle to be fought with caution, it was a battle to be won with fury and surprise. Xanthippus organized his troops with the precision of a blacksmith forging a blade. In the center stood the Carthaginian infantry, hardened men of Africa, Numidians, and Libyans. Their spirits had been dampened by Roman victories, but under Xanthippus, they now stood firm, their spears gripped tightly in hands calloused by years of toil. To the left and right, Xanthippus positioned his cavalry, veterans who knew the ways of battle. But it was the elephants, 100 of them, placed at the front of his formation, that would lead the charge, the hammer to strike at the Roman anvil. The Roman legions advanced, their square formations tight, shields locked, swords drawn. Regulus, at their head, led with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. But Xanthippus was patient. He allowed the Romans to march forward, step by step, their spears bristling and their drums beating. Suddenly, with a signal from Xanthippus, the ground trembled as the Carthaginian elephants thundered forward. The Roman front line hesitated for a moment, as men tried to steel their nerves against the massive beasts charging at them. The elephants smashed into the Roman ranks with a force that could not be halted, tusks gouging through armor, legs trampling the fallen. Where the elephants crushed, the Roman lines buckled. Behind them, Xanthippus unleashed the Carthaginian cavalry, sweeping around the flanks of the Roman infantry. The horsemen surged forward, cutting off Regulus' men from retreat. The battlefield erupted in chaos. Romans were pressed from all sides, pinned between the thundering elephants and the swift cavalry. Xanthippus knew that Roman discipline relied on order, and he shattered that order in a single, thunderous blow. Regulus fought valiantly at the center, but his lines crumbled under the relentless assault. The Roman infantry, compacted into a shrinking circle, was overwhelmed. The Carthaginian foot soldiers, emboldened by the chaos wrought by the elephants, surged forward. Spears found Roman flesh, and the once iron discipline of Rome dissolved into confusion and terror. With the Roman cavalry routed and the infantry surrounded, it became a slaughter. Regulus was captured, his face etched with disbelief as he watched his once mighty army fall to ruin. The once proud legions of Rome lay broken, their blood soaking the fields of Tunis, as Xanthippus stood atop the ridge, his plan executed to perfection. The day was Carthage's, and Xanthippus had given the city its reprieve from destruction. Carthage had won a decisive victory on the African plains. The Romans, humiliated by the defeat, were forced to retreat, licking their wounds and regrouping. The brilliance of Xanthippus had saved Carthage for now. But the war was far from over. Though Carthage had triumphed on land, the Romans still ruled the seas. The fleets of Rome, built with determination and unyielding resources, controlled the vital sea lanes. Carthaginian trade was stifled, its routes blockaded by Roman vessels. The economic lifeblood of Carthage, its vast trade network, began to wither. The defeat at the Battle of the Aegates Islands in 241 BC sealed the fate of Carthage's naval power. Rome, relentless in its pursuit of victory, strangled Carthage's economy, forcing the proud city to its knees. Unable to pay the very mercenaries who had helped them survive the long struggle, Carthage was thrust into the mercenary war, a brutal and bloody conflict that would test the city's resilience once more. As Carthage grappled with internal chaos and financial ruin, Rome seized the opportunity to tighten its grip. Knowing Carthage was weakened, Rome covertly paid off many of the mercenaries, convincing them to switch sides and plunge the city further into turmoil. The betrayal deepened Carthage's crisis, stretching its already strained resources to the breaking point. With its coffers empty and its armies turning against it, Carthage had no choice but to sue for peace. The treaty that followed exacted a heavy toll, not only stripping Carthage of territory but also crippling its influence across the Mediterranean. What had once been a mighty power was now reduced to submission, left to lick its wounds and nurse the bitter taste of defeat. But the true battle for Carthage was not fought solely on the plains of Africa or the seas of the Mediterranean. In the shadows, forces darker and more insidious began to move. Xanthippus had saved Carthage from Rome's blade, but he could not save it from the machinations of the hidden blues. These silent players, who had worked tirelessly to undermine Sparta, now turned their attention to Carthage. Like termites burrowing through the wood of a mighty ship, they crept into the fabric of Carthaginian society, sowing discord and corruption from within. Where Xanthippus saw the need for strength and unity, they saw an opportunity for decay. The results of their work would not be immediate, but the cracks would show. The seeds of Carthage's undoing had been planted, and when the winds of the Second Punic War came, those seeds would bear their bitter fruit. Xanthippus, the Spartan strategist whose brilliance had shattered Rome's advance, was not destined to enjoy the fruits of his victory. Though Carthage had survived the war in Africa, the forces lurking behind the scenes, the hidden blues, had marked him as too dangerous. His knowledge of the old world, his indomitable leadership, and his burning hatred for the corrupting influence of these shadowy powers made him a threat they could not allow to persist. As he set sail for Greece, longing to reunite with his family and lay his spear to rest, the blues had already woven their web. The ship that carried him was sabotaged, its fate sealed before it ever left the harbor. Far from the eyes of those who had celebrated him, Xanthippus met his end in the silent depths of the sea. The blues had removed him from the game, ensuring that his guiding hand and iron will would never again lead men against their designs. In the years to come, his absence would be keenly felt, as the fires of war reignited, and Carthage faced Rome once more without the lion who had once led them to victory.